Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, a place where you can come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 112, What Gets in the Way of Healthy Negotiating in Relationships. So as you know, this month we get all into why learning how to negotiate in healthy ways I think is so important to having great relationships. Because we can ask for what we need, we can set boundaries, and we can problem solve with people who matter to us. Today, I want to talk about some of the individual struggles, though, that you may have that I think can truly get in the way of being able to negotiate what you need. So these are some of the things, certainly not all of them, but I think the biggest variables for us to look at. And you could be anywhere on the continuum from doing great in this area to really struggling or somewhere in between. Perhaps you've already identified these things for yourself and you're already working on them. So one of the biggest things we talk about in this podcast and the meaning of own it is ownership of the self. Owning what you think, feel, need, do, and choose, and what you want in life, who you want to be. So it's no surprise, I think, that one of the biggest barriers that I have found over the years working with folks who really struggle to know how to negotiate is low self-esteem. I think low self-esteem, unfortunately, is at the core of many, many things. Anxiety, depression, unhealthy relationships, self-sabotage, not being happy, not being able to be assertive, not having great vulnerable connections in our relationships. So it's a really big deal. And even though it's hard for some of us to admit that we may struggle with self-esteem, I think it's so important to take a look at, and it's so changeable. That's what's wonderful. So what do I mean when I say low self-esteem? Because I think it is so misunderstood. But basically, it's outsourcing who you are, looking out there in the world to define who you are instead of going within and finding that intrinsically. Some examples of low self-esteem are lack of self-care. We don't take great care of ourselves. We don't practice self-love. We may talk to ourselves critically. We may talk about ourselves critically to others. We have a lot of shame, a lot of not good enough, a lot of unearned guilt. We may project that onto others and may be really harsh and judgmental of other people. Those who struggle with low self-esteem usually lack self-discipline. That is a form of self-care. There's lots of chaos. They have a hard time getting things together, keeping them together, being structured, asking for help. A lot of times they need to be needed to feel okay, so they end up doing too much for everyone else. Then they kind of lose who they are. It's disowning what you think, what you really think and why, what you're really feeling in the moment and why, what you need and why that's valid, what you've experienced and why that matters, what you're passionate about, what you're curious about and what you care about, what is unique to you. Owning the self. So if you struggle with low self-esteem, it's going to be really hard to negotiate in healthy ways. You're going to have to probably act out, be passive-aggressive, play the victim, hope and pray people stop and rescue you and give you what you need because they feel sorry for you. And a lot of times we're doing these things subconsciously. It's not like we're trying to manipulate maliciously, but we are manipulating outcomes, as opposed to being direct and assertive. So that is why loving who you are, honoring who you are, standing in your truth, And learning how to ask for what you need assertively is so important, because how are you going to negotiate if you don't know where you stand? And if you don't believe in you, that it's valid what you're thinking and feeling. So that's the first big struggle. And that is a journey, certainly, to work on. I don't think it's something we want to work on alone. I think self-esteem gets hammered in relationships growing up, and I think we need healthy others later on in life to help us heal, so that they can provide healthy, accurate mirrors to hold up to you, to really give you a sense of who you are, of what matters, how you're behaving, what's real for you, to honor what you feel, honor what you need, honor what your fears are, all that stuff. So you don't have to look out there to find you. You can go within, because you have enough healthy people around you to allow you to do that. It's very vulnerable work and extremely powerful, and it's a game changer. It's one of the things I've worked with for years with individuals and groups, working on self-confidence, because I know deep down that if someone can start really getting that together, all the other things that go along with it fall into place. And all of these concepts we're going to talk about today are interconnected, I think. So the next big one that goes hand in hand with self-esteem is boundaries. People who struggle to know how to negotiate often lack boundaries or have very rigid boundaries. Rigid rules to keep them safe, living in the box. Which means you can't tell where you end and others' needs, feelings, and choices begin. It's hard to say no. You can't detach from what's going on with other people. Can't let go of outcomes. This often involves very black and white thinking, perfect or horrible. It's always no, or you're all in. You can't be in between. You can't ask for gradients of what you need, perhaps. It's very controlling. We're trying to control that outcome, get our hands on it, which is the opposite of being able to let go of the outcomes and just be open and flexible, do the right thing, and risk letting the chips fall. And there's lots of anxiety that goes with this. All that obsessing and worrying usually is a really good indicator that we're struggling with boundaries, because we're finding it really difficult to come to acceptance about what is, acceptance of reality. Because, guys, boundaries show us what isn't our business to change, and therefore not in our control. And I get it. Part of negotiating is understanding what reality is. That you can't change another person. You can only tell them about you. And reality might just feel too real, too overwhelming. Probably because in the past it really did. So you struggle with boundaries and you'd rather focus on them changing and them being different and them caving and giving in instead of standing firm in your truth and risking. They may not even want to honor you or be able to. So boundaries, saying no, hearing no, saying no to ourselves. Good self-discipline is really important for relationships. We need to be able to trust ourselves so that they can trust us. Another aspect is finding it hard to own the good stuff about yourself. Not in an arrogant way by any means, but can you really own your talents, your accomplishments, maybe things that you're passionate about or that you value? Maybe even things you are a part of that you feel really good about, like an organization or a volunteer group or a church or a family or a work community or a neighborhood. The good stuff. It's easy to own the bad stuff, isn't it? That's safer. Owning the good stuff is a lot more vulnerable. What if someone calls you out and says, that's not true? Who do you think you are? Well, who you think you are is your job to decide, not anyone else's. People who struggle to negotiate do a lot of comparing to others. That's a self-esteem issue and a boundary issue all rolled into one. You're either feeling one up or one down. maybe better than them or worse than them. You're looking outside yourself for your sense of worth. And fear says, oh, thank God I'm better than them. Or maybe I'm horrible because I don't make as much money as she does. Or I'm not as popular as he is. I want you to decide what feels good and what feels right. And a lot of values work goes into this. We've talked a lot about beliefs and values on the show for that reason. Because when you're grounded in your truth, you're good. You feel congruent. You like who you are. People who struggle to negotiate are so focused on comparing themselves to others. And I think deep down doubting themselves. I mean, how are you going to ask for what you need? How are you going to ask for a raise if you don't believe you deserve one? Or you're so afraid that maybe compared to your colleague, you don't? Wow. Intrinsic value. That's what we need to focus on instead. People who struggle with negotiating, obviously, I think, struggle with assertiveness, which is something I have taught for years, and I'm still learning about it. You don't state your preferences. Maybe you're hoping others will read your mind. Wouldn't that be so much easier? Because that would keep you from having to assert yourself and maybe looking ridiculous, maybe doing it wrong. It's not received well. Maybe it goes very badly, and here comes conflict, which is what we've been trying to avoid all along. Maybe you go along to get along. Maybe it's whatever works for them kind of thing. Now, of course, it's great to be flexible and not be rigid and not make it all about us all the time. But just make sure you practice being honest with yourself and others. And it should always feel like you're choosing, not just in fear. Like, I don't want them to get pissed. I don't want to come across as selfish. I'm afraid they'll be mad at me. So avoidance is fear. So, you know the thing to ask yourself, what am I afraid of? Because if I have any fear going on, this is not good. I need to go sit with me for a moment and figure out what I'm afraid of and what is the right thing to do instead. Because again, circle back to self-esteem. We just talked about a moment ago. If you are not doing what feels right for you, you're not going to like yourself. In fact, like we've talked about, every time we go against our truth, our self-esteem sinks another notch lower. It's not going to go up not being who you really want to be. Only when we risk practicing, trying out a little bit at a time, who we want to be, do we start feeling better. This is such a powerful change that I'm so honored that I get to sit and witness with clients as they share these moments with me. Another aspect of not being able to negotiate in our relationships is finding yourself in a victim stance most of the time. Everyone else holds the power. Being a victim, or a victim mindset rather, means not owning your choices. Even if your choices sucked and they felt limited, we still have to own them because we still have choices. But instead, you're always focused on the fact that you had to do or say something or couldn't do or say something based on someone else, based on something that they did or didn't do, said or didn't say. It's all because of them. It's the poor me attitude, right? Because if you don't have any power, how are you going to feel empowered? It's the poor me without looking at the reality of how all this happened. And maybe to own perhaps some of your situation, because maybe some of it's your own doing. Or at least allowing bad things, allowing yourself to be treated poorly, not speaking up for what you need, not saying no. I always sit with clients and say, all right, let's go back 10 or 15 dominoes to how we got here today. And a lot of times you're going to find, if you go way back in the scenario or way back in the beginnings of the relationship, there were red flags. There were moments when you could have set a boundary for yourself and you didn't because you were afraid. It's all the things we've talked about. We see what we want to see in relationships. We don't like reality. We're afraid there won't be someone better to come along. We're afraid they'll leave if we set a boundary in the beginning. Well, when we do this, we set up this scenario that we don't matter. That our needs, our boundaries, our wants are not as important, and we go against ourselves. Then it gets even worse because then we disown parts of ourselves and we get all caught up in them. And yeah, you're really going to feel like a victim because you are at that point. But this is self-created victimization, I think, which sounds terrible to say. There are certainly times when we are the true victim of something, like kids. Kids have no power. It's always the grown-up or the older child who is in charge. So I don't hold kids responsible per se for what happens to them. But as grown-ups, we can also be true victims, like identity theft, maybe being rear-ended at a red light, maybe when you were a child and you were bullied at school. There are things that are outside of our control and not of our own doing. Those are true victim situations. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about not owning our power because we're afraid to. We have to own who we are and that we do have choices all the time in order to be able to go up to someone and ask for what you need. In order for you to be healthy and grounded when they approach you with what they need. It's really important. We can't be a victim and be a partner. It's really tough to pull off. It's hard to be a victim and have people want to spend time with you, to have respect for you, to feel less anxious around you, for them not to want to feel like they have to rescue you, for them to trust you, and for you to trust yourself. That's really important. And finally, I think, and this goes a little deeper, but I think folks who have a hard time knowing how to grieve and therefore detach are going to have a hard time negotiating. Now, bear with me, because you may not immediately see the connection. But if we are not able to grieve and surrender to what is, we can't have acceptance. And if we can't have acceptance, we're going to be controlling. We're going to have to be. What else are you going to do? So it's really hard to negotiate in healthy ways and be controlling at the same time, to want to fix someone's feelings, to want to manage the outcomes. Negotiating is all about risk, right? You come up to the table, you ask for what you need, going to be yay or nay, and you have to live with that. Because if someone says no to you and then you start yelling at them, or you shut down, or you get pouty, or you make their life miserable for the next 37 hours, that's not okay. That is not grown up, and that's not acceptance. And therefore, that's why I'm saying we have to know how to grieve, or at least start that process. So we know we start boiling on the inside. We know, okay, I'm bumping up against a boundary I don't like, or a really awful reality that's overwhelming me. What do I need to do? Instead of putting it on the other person. Instead of saying, what do you mean? You're not going to give me that. So there are stages of grief. For those of you who don't know, the DABDA. Denial, anger, bargaining, the what if and the if only. Depression, resignation, waving the white flag. And then acceptance, where we've let go. But a lot of people that I've come across over the years don't let themselves get really angry. They're so afraid that there's so much untapped rage there. They've told me, Mary, if I open that can, I don't know what's going to happen. Or Dad raged all the time when I was growing up. I don't want to be that. So there's a lot of fear to getting in touch with some very healthy grief anger, vulnerable anger. Not rage at other people. Not displaced anger, real grief anger. About losses, old wounds, and even newer hurts that are real and they're valid. Grieving is about surrendering to what is, that we can't make it unhappen, and that there are so many vulnerable feelings underneath that anger. But at least if you hit the anger, you're saying, hell no, I don't like this. It separates you from others. You can't own the self and not own your hell no. You can't. But I know it's so vulnerable to imagine surrendering, to feel that angry, to feel that helpless or hopeless. You know, our resistance is there for a reason. It comes from not allowing ourselves to feel or sit with our feelings and know that we will be okay. Because maybe growing up, it wasn't going to be okay. There wasn't anyone to really sit with you, aka a grown-up, and allowed you to sit in your feelings and validated them. So maybe we don't have a template from those early years about how to sit in deep emotions and work through them. Instead, we had to become disconnected from those parts because deep down, we knew it was not going to go well if we brought them up and shared them in the family. There's so much old shame that might need to be healed. Lack of self-love, unearned guilt. So maybe there are some things to grieve, and also learning how in the moment, okay, what's going on? What do I not want to accept here? My partner says it's not cool for me to spend that money on that thing I want. Okay. The boss says no to a raise right now. How I handle it has everything to do with how well I know how to grieve. Where as a grown-up, I can walk in the other room and have my little meltdown by myself, but get in touch very quickly. Oh, I don't like this. This is awful. This is scary. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. And get into the vulnerable. I'm scared. What if I don't get this raise? Am I going to have enough money? Am I going to be okay is the big question at the bottom of it all. So honoring and valuing ourselves in those moments is so important to allow ourselves to grieve and be in touch with what we're grieving and that it's okay. And then once we've validated all that, then we naturally, typically get into the concept of, okay, now what? If I can't change that, what can I do? Even begrudgingly, what can I do? What are my choices? Okay, let me renegotiate something. But I don't lose my mind, especially on people that I care about, because I heard the word no. Now, this is outside of a tragedy or trauma. Please know that. Hand in hand with grief work is detachment. Like we've talked about, it's also connected to boundaries. What's about them versus what's about me? It means we care, but it isn't ours. Their thoughts, their feelings, their choices, their struggles, their behaviors, their beliefs, how they see us. That's about them, and we are powerless, simply powerless over those things. We have no power to change them. We can grieve. First, we grieve. We can grieve and then come to acceptance and figure out what we're going to do, what we're willing to do and not willing to do. We focus instead on our own feelings, not on the other person. Detachment work takes a while. It takes a lot of practice. The ways that we don't detach are insidious and sometimes harder to see because they look like caring and they look like giving and being generous and being concerned. But you got to know what's yours and what's theirs. And detachment work is also about letting go of those outcomes. Working through that fear. Not manipulating the outcomes and manipulating people in turn. Deciding what's more important than that. And here are a few things I want you to kind of think about as you're going through this month with us and thinking about negotiating. Because being a grown-up, being mature, means we have a little bit more wisdom, and it's not just about us. We're not the little 5-year-old having a tantrum because we're not getting what we want. So deciding what's more important to you, and number one, maybe it's your integrity. Maybe you want to mean what you say, and you want to feel good about that, and you want it to feel clean. You don't want to feel like No matter what we tell ourselves, you don't want to feel like you had to manipulate and get people to do what you wanted because, yeah, that feels great for a second, and then we feel really shitty about ourselves. Unless you're a sociopath. Yeah. Maybe you want to feel more confident. So learning how to negotiate can help you feel good about being assertive and just being really direct and saying exactly what you need and nothing more, nothing less. So it feels genuine, it's on point. Maybe you're tired of caving and people pleasing. Or maybe acting out to get what you want. It's really hard to trust ourselves and like ourselves again when we're doing that kind of behavior. Oh, there's some secret power or you wouldn't be doing it. But you can't go to bed at night feeling good about yourself. Maybe you want to know how to problem solve without it being a shit show or never being resolved. Remember that? All those arguments you've had in relationships, nothing ever really got resolved, did it? Because we can't resolve things until they're vulnerably spoken and listened to. And that ties into maybe you want to deep down be able to collaborate and connect. Because guys, we all want to connect. On a vulnerable level, I don't care what we say otherwise. Maybe you want to be trusted and respected. And you want to ultimately trust yourself and feel good about that. And here's the thing, like we've talked about before, the other person can usually intuitively feel that you're not expressing your truth anyway. You know that, they know that. It never feels genuine or complete or clean. What's real is sometimes you don't care what restaurant they want to go to. Sometimes you might. Sometimes they're having a really rough week and you want to give them what they want. Because right now that's a little bit more important than what you needed. But you don't do that every week. You don't always hang on the cross and put your needs aside. There should be a good blend of giving and receiving. And they're doing the same. So how do you start working on this? Well, if you've identified with anything we mentioned today, like maybe poor boundaries, struggling with grief work, or self-confidence, know, like I said, that they are connected. And I think we must work on each one of them in order to heal, grow, and become more assertive. The biggest thing is don't try to do all this work alone. Some of it you will. Some of it you will read and you'll journal and you'll cry and you'll think about and then you'll share with people close to you. And that's great. But I think we need help. It's just too big. It's too overwhelming. So get a coach, get a support group, get some people that'll hold your feet to the fire in a loving way. Get people to teach you. If you have past trauma, though, that has not been worked through, please connect with a counselor first before you get into coaching. So you can have a safe place to dig deep and heal those old wounds and pull yourself together enough so then you can go into coaching, and really be ready to own the solutions and really do the work. And no one has to hold your hand to do the work. They'll hold you accountable. Look at how to practice healthy boundaries. A good coach can help you walk through this. Check out earlier episodes to learn more about boundaries, and there's plenty of information out there. Boundaries is a huge paradigm, a big concept that takes a while to work on. Oh, but so worth it. Start thinking about a collaborative spirit instead of a victim mindset. When we finally start to heal some of our own wounds and we don't feel as beat up by life anymore, I think we tend to naturally want the same freedom for others. So you're going to want to have relationships where other people can also ask for what they need. You're going to want someone who likes themselves too. They should mirror us. Wherever we are in our growth, we kind of need people to be there as well. It feels healthier. It feels more normal. If you're working on detachment and empathy, know that that takes inner and outer work and lots of practice. I think, especially with empathy, it's a skill we have to get in touch with as we get in touch with our own self-compassion. Doing the no wonder statements with ourselves. Well, no wonder I'm tired. I didn't sleep well last night. Or no wonder I got short with him. I had a really awful day that I haven't been able to process yet. I think as we separate out what's about other people from what is about us, too, that detachment work goes hand in hand with empathy. You say, well, that's their thoughts, her feelings, his needs. You immediately separate it and pull it away from you so that you can clearly identify what are your feelings about her saying no. Her saying no, that is her process. She totally has a right to say no to you. You want her to be able to say no so you can have a healthy relationship. And on your side, detached from that, you're really disappointed. You wanted her to say yes, and that is just as valid. So you therefore get better at both identifying and accepting that the other person you're negotiating with has the same right to ask for what they need. In fact, you want them to because you want to trust them. Remember, we just said that. As you validate what you need, you can also, this is cool, better understand what they might think, feel, and need. Because guys, we are not going to let anyone have what we don't let ourselves have. We're going to think they're being ridiculous and selfish, asking for too much. Maybe we have not let ourselves ask for things that are our right to have. If they want attention and we won't allow ourselves to ask for that, how are we going to react to that? If they want time by themselves and be able to go on vacation by themselves, but we haven't even taken a day off for us, oh, come on. The resentment and the terror of letting them have that because you deep down have never validated that for yourself, that's going to be hard to pull off. The other thing you want to do is start practicing speaking affirmatively. And this you can practice starting today. And solution focused. What is a solution? Am I even interested in a solution? Instead of defensively or otherwise fear-based and focused on everyone else but yourself. For example, instead of saying, I can't stand it when you can say, I would love it if you would do this instead. Instead of saying, can't you see I need the car? Instead, detach from whatever is going on for them. I will need the car in an hour. So instead of saying, I can't do it right now, I'm way too busy, can't you see that? You can say, hey, I won't be able to do that this minute, but I can certainly take care of that in the morning. Keep the focus back on you. Peel off what is about them, even if you're right, even if they're being ridiculous. That's about them. Unless you're validating what someone thinks and feels and wants and needs, we shouldn't be talking about them to them. Finally, identify where you struggle. Then get some support around healing and changing. That's the best place to start. I think we start out needing lots of education and guidance. We have to kind of figure out what the hell's going on, label all this stuff, label where we struggle, and then what is the healthy opposite, right, that we want to acquire. But we need safe people to work through it all, and we need accountability. Because, guys, staying committed to the work can be hard. But we know that half-baked efforts yield half-baked results. The other thing I want you to think about outside of negotiating is working on boundaries, grieving, and self-esteem can really reap huge benefits in so many other areas of our life, from relationships to better careers to parenting to maybe just feeling more confident and happier. So what price would you pay for all of that? So today we talked about some of the struggles that can get in the way of being able to negotiate in our relationships. We talked about the idea that grieving and detaching, setting healthy boundaries, honoring other people's boundaries, and our self-esteem wounds are often obstacles to being able to collaborate and problem solve. If any of these resonate, please reach out and grab an empowerment coach or a therapist if you have some trauma back there. It is so worth it. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you got some things you needed. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay grounded, and be the hope. Focus on the good in you and find some good out there this week. If you don't already get the newsletter, go to ownitpowercast.com and sign up. There's show notes for each episode, and the newsletter will provide you the bonus downloads and all the other great info. Okay, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you could begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.